Hi, it's Stephen Van Kampen-Lewis on January 23rd, 2021. And as I was going through my greenhouse the other day, actually filming for the episodes I just posted about some of these nobiliors and that nobilior hybrid, I was going through and looking at what's in bloom, but also looking for new growths. It's, as I just said, it's the end of January, but it seems like things are starting to wake up. Including two of my Cyrtopodiums, which are right here. And one is a terrestrial and one is an epiphyte. And I need to repot them. So since I need to repot them, I figured I would bring y'all along and show you how I repot them. So first of all, this is Cyrtopodium holstei. Does that look? Hopefully that works. If not, I will add a label in the video. So Cyrtopodium holstei, you can see I repotted this in spring of 2020, so a little less than a year ago. The problem is, when I was making this or repotting this, I didn't account for how tall this guy gets and how small of a pot I have it potted in, and so I was coming out all the time and it would be laying down on the ground, so it's not super useful. But this gives you an indication of what I'm going to show you today. So I'm going to be using clay pots, a sand and peat moss mix, 50-50. I'll end up zip tying the whole thing down so it doesn't fall over, and I'll also use these stakes to stake it up. So this is kind of a sneak preview of what's going to happen. I'm going to try it in this pot, or not this pot that I just broke, or this pot. We'll see. I will let you know what I do. Actually, you know what? I can use this pot. The plant doesn't care, neither do I. I'm going to use that pot, at least for one of these plants. But for this one, what I'm going to do is pull it out of here. First, I'm going to see if I can yank it out. I suspect I won't be able to do that. In a single year, these guys just put out a massive root system, and you can see the pot was probably too small, not only from a tipping standpoint of having it fall over, but this size of a plant probably shouldn't be in a pot this small. So that's my fault. That's on me. But we'll see. So I'm going to try and pull it out right now, and if it doesn't work, I will smash it with a hammer. Before I do that, I want to show you my other one that I'm going to repot. The epiphyte is Cyrtopodium saintlegerianum, larger plant. I'll show you flowers here right now. Really cool looking. One of the neat things about Cyrtopodiums is that they bloom. Their bloom spike comes out at the same time as the rest of the growth, and you can see there's a new growth coming in right here. This will actually split into two. One will be the new growth and one will be the bloom spike. But I'm going to put this guy down for a moment so that I can focus on the holstei. So, a few things to know before we smash the pot or pull it out, whatever. The terrestrial mix that I use is 50% peat, which is the stuff. It's pretty inexpensive at your local big box store, mixed with 50% sand. If you go online, there are some people that will tell you different types of sand to use. I don't recall if I purchased the correct type of sand, but my plants seem to love it. And I got it at Home Depot. So another quick view, multi-purpose sand from Home Depot. Seems to work fine. Yeah. The sand is just plain old, looks like beach sand. Nothing special. So let's pull this guy out of the pot. I'm going to turn the camera off and work on it, and I'll get back to you. All right, I'm back. I was able to actually pull it out. I cut the roots off the bottom, and I was able to pull the whole thing out, and you can see this is what a very healthy Cyrtopodium root mass looks like. It should be that's a single year. I cut most of these roots off last year. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut off this old desiccated back bulb. I'm squeezing it to see if there's any life in it or any moisture that the plant could use, and I'm not feeling anything. I'm also going to cut off this last year's bloom spike, and I'm probably actually going to leave this root ball. These roots are still good. It's going to put that much out at least again in the spring, so I could probably trim them, but I have no interest. So, like I said, another thing to think about when you're trimming your orchids is if you can just twist something off instead of cutting it, that works too. I actually kind of prefer that. I don't really have a particular reason why, but it just seems, especially for something like this, which could ruin what's left of these crappy little scissors that I have, and I do need them. I also have to be careful because there is a new growth in here, and I really want it to bloom. Cutting off the bloom spike. And so we have this left. Now, I'm not entirely sure which size pot to use. So, as I'm going through, taking the tags off the bottom, I'm actually going to sit it in both pots to see, to sort of estimate how tippy, I guess, it'll be when I repot it. Put that in the garbage pile. And so you can see, so if I pot this in this guy, that will give me probably a couple years growth at least. The nice thing about Cyrtopodiums is while they grow tall and their leaves are very wide in terms of how much space they cover, kind of like a palm tree, it just sort of branches out. Their growths are really tightly, they're really right next to each other. So a pot this big will last a long time. Something else to consider is that when you're using peat and sand, it's something that can come out of the bottom of the pot very easily. If you're in a plastic pot, there's probably going to be a whole bunch of holes around the bottom, so that could be difficult. For that kind of situation, I would recommend putting small rocks in the bottom to sort of help block those holes. For these, you can see I have a single hole in the bottom. What I like to do, there's a couple things that I typically do. I am going to take some of this eco web and sort of jam it in the bottom of the hole there, and that should be enough to keep most of the sand and peat in. Some will come out, as you can see. I don't know if you can see through there, but you don't want it to be waterproof. You don't want it to be, I want it to hold sand in but let water out, which is tricky. Something else that I use a lot is just a broken piece of clay in the bottom hole. So if I didn't have the eco web, I would put this on the bottom of the pot. And so if my hand is the bottom of the pot, it's going to be resting there, and the sand is going to be largely blocked from going through. And you have to want to think about how you're putting this down. You want the arch pointing up, right? So it's like this in the pot. If I put it this way, that's going to form a seal around the bottom of the pot because the media is going to push down, and there's a really good chance that the water won't be able to come out in the way that it should. So it can be kind of tricky figuring out a system to let the water run through the pot, but hold the sand and the peat because they are so fine. But again, both of these scenarios work, and I've used both of them for many years. All right. So here is our peat. Like I said, nothing special. I bought it at Home Depot. You can probably buy it at your local hardware store. I've got about 2 large handfuls in there. So what I'm going to do is grab 2 or 3 handfuls of sand to make a 50-50 peat to sand mix. So that works for my conditions here in Austin. I like to water these guys every day in the heat of summer, and I find that that is a perfect amount to let me water a lot. It still holds the moisture that they need, but it's porous enough to let good circulation. So like I said, these guys are terrestrial. This particular species is terrestrial. So we want that sort of terrestrial mix, but if you see them in the wild in their habitat, it's very thin soil as far as I can tell for the most part. It is sandy. They're sort of on these rock outcrops surrounded by grass and maybe some other shrubs. It's not a deep, rich soil that you would want to grow your veggies in. It's fairly thin, so trying to replicate that here with this mixture. So as I mix this, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, I need a little more sand. So I'm just eyeballing it. I'm not measuring it. For those of you who are more type A personality, you know, feel free to measure it. I'm not that way. All right. So we have a good mixture in here. I don't know if you can see the sand or not. Probably still looks fairly similar to the last time I showed it to you, but trust me, the sand is in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill this about 1/3 of the way with the new mixture. I'm going to pack it down a little bit. And then I'm going to add the plant. And so I'm going to see if I can get the back of the plant, the old bulbs, as close to the back of the pot as possible, so that as it grows, as the new growths come out, and has that much more room to grow. I don't have to repot for a couple years. I'm also going to tilt these guys a little bit because as they were tilted over so often in 2020, they didn't grow quite right. So you can see that this is nice straight up and down, but then I'm having to tilt the whole thing a little bit. Now I'm just adding the media, pouring it in. And I'm packing it down so it's nice and firm. So ideally, you know, you want to push, and this is true for just about all the orchids, whether it's a Cattleya in bark media or if it's a terrestrial like we have here. I want that media to be really firm and really tight. In fact, I'm going to turn this camera around and show you what I'm talking about. So here's the media, and I am really trying to push it down. Grab a little bit more and add it here. And I think that's about as far up as I want to go. I do like to leave a little space between the top of the media and the pot there. And I have to fill in this sort of back side here. Just a little bit, and then jam it in. You'd be surprised how far it goes down once you start jamming it in. All right, let me see if I can, if I can part these aerial roots here so you can see the new growth. As I said earlier, that little new growth will split into two, and I'll get one side will be a growth and one side will be a bloom spike. So I don't know if you can see, but this kind of wiggles around a little bit. So I'm going to add some stakes to this, and then I'm going to add some zip ties to hold this thing firm. So what I've done, what I've done is I've added these two stakes that you can see here. I'm going to zip tie them together. I'm going to zip tie this guy to here, and I'm going to zip tie these two bulbs to this this stake here. Nothing particularly fancy about this. Zip tie. This helps with the stability of the plant. And if it falls over, sometimes that can help with the stability of the plant in the pot not coming out. Again, zip tie, nothing fancy. Something to think about when you're doing these zip ties is that, you know, as these bulbs fatten up, this is true for Catasetums too. As these bulbs fatten up, this is true for Cattleyas as well, actually. You can see that they'll start to swell and sort of swell around the zip ties. I haven't found that hurts the plant at all, but just something to think about. You can always cut it off maybe halfway through the growing season once the roots have really taken hold. Then I'll take the tag and I'll get it back in. And that could be it. And that's it. You know, if this guy gets a little too top heavy and starts to fall over, I might add a zip tie around the whole thing. I've done that many times before and it is helpful. I'm not sure if I'll do it this time. We'll see. Stay tuned. Next, we're gonna get this Saintlegerianum, which is right here. So this will be in a different potting media because this one grows at the top of palm trees rather than in the ground. Like most Cyrtopodiums are terrestrial, so that peat sand mix works for most of them. But for the epiphytic ones, like this one, we're going to use an epiphytic mix. So currently, this is potted in bark on the bottom, and then I put sphagnum at the top, a couple of inches. And this plant has been really healthy and doing well that way for 4, maybe 5 years. I don't really remember. But anyway, so this one is growing on the bottom a little bit, not quite as much, but it needs to be in a new pot, and I suspect I'm gonna have to smash this one. Yep, I'll be right back. All right, so we've got some carnage here from what used to be a pot, but we also have a solid brick of roots. Look at this. There's nothing. You can't see any media left. That's what 4 or 5 years of root growth does. I don't think I'm gonna pull this out and repot it and clean it up. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm actually going to have to find a saw and cut these roots off a little bit. I was possibly going to just leave it and plunk it in the new pot, but it's just too massive of a root ball for me to do that. I'm a little torn, I'm not gonna lie, but I'm gonna saw this and I'll get right back to you. Saw, root ball. This is what it looks like in the middle. So it looks like it's mostly broken down, but not too badly broken down. So there's some perlite and maybe some charcoal. You know what? Maybe I didn't originally repot this. I may have gotten this from Stephen Moffat because this looks like his mix. But it's still good. It looks like charcoal and perlite to me. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna continue to saw off these roots, clean it up a little bit, probably cut this part off and this part, and then plop the whole thing in the next pot. So I'm gonna start cutting. We're gonna do a little bit of speeding up. All right, so root ball is mostly shaved off. I have this new growth here and this new growth here. I'm gonna leave this root ball as it is. And I'm gonna plop it into this pot that I broke, kind of like this. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fill this probably about a third of the way with orchiata after I plug the bottom again. And then I'm gonna fill up a little more orchiata, and then I'll show you what I'm gonna use on the top. It's gonna be a cocoa choir instead of a sphagnum. So, hold on. All right, so back of the plant is here. I'm gonna jam this up against the back of the pot so that the new growths can grow towards the middle. And I'm going to fill it with some more orchiata. I'm gonna fill it with some more orchiata and then some cocoa choir on top. So I've added my orchiata, and I'm going to show you that here right now. And you can see that it's probably close to halfway full with orchiata. And so what I want to do now actually is I'm going to take this cocoa choir, which is a sort of coconut fiber, and I'm going to put it on top. Now, if you don't have coconut fiber at home, which you probably don't, sphagnum works very well for this type of thing. So maybe do a 50% to 2/3 orchiata or large grade bark, and then put the sort of moisture retentive stuff on top, the cocoa choir or the sphagnum. And by cocoa choir, you can kind of see it's this hairy, fuzzy stuff that's going to hold moisture. Of course, it's important to pack it down really as firmly as you can. Check it out. So I really took this and I packed it down. And what I'm probably going to do is, since this is all the choir I could find around my grow area, I'm either going to find some more or add a little more sphagnum on top. Not a whole lot, but just enough to keep the moisture in. So I'm also going to zip tie this one because it is very top heavy. So what I'll do is I'm going to take these 3 zip ties and just tie them around the sides so that if it starts to wobble, the zip ties will hold it down. All right, so I just zip tied this down. Let's take a look. You can see that the zip tie comes down here and comes down here. And so this guy, you can see it's still a little more wobbly than I'd like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to really cinch these down so that they're a little tighter and it holds everything in place a little bit better. And one last look at the repotted orchids. We've got the Cyrtopodium holstii right here in its terrestrial mix, and the Cyrtopodium saintlegerianum here in its epiphyte mix or epiphytic mix. And just in case anybody's wondering, I've got my punctatum here, which is a very wide-ranging species, and this one does exceptionally well. I've got that in a terrestrial mix as well. The ones that you see there in Florida grow as epiphytes, but this one seems to do quite well in a shallow terrestrial pot, as you can see by the monstrous growth from 2020. Anyway, see you guys.